you used to work for Richard Nixon, right?
I did. I worked with former President Richard Nixon, not when he was president. I was not born then. During the last years of his life.
Okay.
So in the mid-1990s. It was my first job out of college.
So, like, how did you get that job? How did you get a job with Richard Nixon?
I love the story, so thank you for
Yes.
asking. So I was a junior at Colgate, and I was majoring in political science, and I was taking all of the normal courses, like the presidency, Congress, yada, yada. And for the spring of my junior year, I saw on the syllabus a brand new course called National Security to be taught by a new professor. And I said, oh, that's interesting. So I took the course, loved the material so much, Terrence, American foreign policy, national security, that I thought, okay, I want to build a career out of this. How do I do that? So I went to the professor. I was like the only conservative kid on the campus, and he was like the only conservative professor on the campus.
Okay.
So he became my mentor. And I said, how do I build a career out of this? So he got up, he went to his bookcase, and he pulled down 4 books, and he handed them to me. And he said, when you go home this summer, before your senior year, read these books, and when you come back, we'll talk about what you learned from them and how to build a career out of it. And I said, great. So that summer, I'm home at my mom's, and I take the first book, which was the thinnest book, because my brain was tired after a year in college.
Right.
So I took the skinniest book, and it was a book by President Nixon.
Wow.
He used to write a new foreign policy book every 2 years. So this was his latest one at the time. And I read it, and it absolutely blew me away. So much so that I sat down and I wrote him a letter. So I was nothing. I was a college kid with no money, no connections, no nothing. But I sat down and I wrote the former president of the United States a letter about the issues that he raised in the book. I mailed it. I actually mailed 2 copies, one to his publisher and one to him care of his local post office. And do you know, Terrence, he got both copies. This is hand of God. This is what I mean. God puts you exactly where you need to be at exactly the right time. So about a month later, I'm getting ready to go back to college. And I go to my mom's mailbox, and I take out this beautiful stationery, and it's a handwritten note from Richard Nixon to me, thanking me for my letter and inviting me to come in and talk to him in northern New Jersey, you know?
What was going through your mind?
I remember sitting on the bed in the bedroom I grew up in my mom's house, right? And I'm getting ready to go back for my senior year, and I started to shake holding that letter. Because he hand wrote it to me. And he wrote, Dear Miss Crowley, I want to thank you for your very thoughtful and comprehensive letter of July 19th. And then he said, you know how the real world works.
Wow.
And then please contact my office after Labor Day. We'll set up a mutually convenient time. And so I did. I went down. I came down from upstate New York where I was in college to see him in northern New Jersey. And he gave me an hour and a half of his time talking to me about politics, foreign policy, a little political gossip. And we just clicked and hit it off. So when I graduated the following May, that's when he offered me a job. And I ended up working with him for the last 4 years of his life.
Wow. I know when you sent that letter, you were probably thinking, he's probably not going to get this letter.
Absolutely. I forgot about it.
Yeah.
I totally
He's not going to
forgot
get
about
this letter. Like, so what did your parents say at that time?
Well, my parents were divorced.
Okay.
And I was with my mom, and she, when she came home from work that day, I'm holding this letter, handwritten letter and I said, Mom, you're not going to believe this. She's like, what? And I said, remember that letter I sent to President Nixon? And she said, yeah. And I said, he wrote back.
Oh, wow.
And I handed her the letter. I now have it mounted and framed in my home, and it's my most prized possession, along with a picture of me standing between Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan with my arm around both of them.
Wow. That's amazing. So you still have the letter?
Of course.
So you haven't put it on eBay yet?
No, I have not. And in fact, I have massive amounts of material. I've never really talked about this before. You're getting an exclusive. I have massive amounts of material. Everything President Nixon wrote to me. He would read the New York Times because he had to, not because he wanted to.
Right.
And he would rip out different articles and op-eds and things, and he'd take his pen and he would write M for Monica. Please read this. Let's discuss.
Wow.
And he'd leave it on my desk in the office. And so I'd take it and then we'd talk about it. I have every shred of paper that he wrote on to me.
You still have all of that?
So I have Yeah, massive volumes.
You still have all of that.
I have all of it.
And you still got it.
I still have it.
You know what? In this Biden economy, if somebody had what you had, they probably would have sold it because people are doing really bad right now.
Well, you know what, Terrence?
They would have auctioned that off because of Biden.
Well, you know what? If the Biden economy continues like this, I might have to auction it off.
1999. Ripped out paper from Lincoln. Yeah. I mean, not from Lincoln. I said Lincoln. Nixon. Now, and I know you haven't met Lincoln.
I have not. No.
Yeah. Now, I think Nancy Pelosi met Lincoln.
Definitely.
I think she was probably around when Lincoln was around.
Yes.
I think she tried to impeach
Joe Biden too.
Lincoln. Yeah, Joe Biden too.
Dianne Feinstein.
That's just amazing. Like, that's amazing. So, what do you think Richard Nixon would think about President Trump?
Oh,
hold on.
Yeah.
What do you think President Nixon would think about President Trump?
It's a great question, Terrence. Thank you. And, I've been so blessed in my life, and all glory to God on this. I have been very blessed to have now worked for two American presidents, Richard Nixon and Donald Trump. And man, do I know how to pick them or what?
Yes, you do.
Only the most controversial presidents for Monica. No boring no Grover Cleveland's up in here, okay, for me. Only, there's something about these presidents, first of all, brilliant. Secondly, masterful communicators, but also underdogs with regard to the deep state. And that's a conversation for you and me for another day about how the deep state took out Richard Nixon. It's the same deep state that is trying to take out Donald Trump, okay? But I've been so blessed to know these two men. So I feel, and to have worked for them. So I feel that I can answer that question this way. Back in the 1980s, Donald Trump was a very successful businessman, right? And he appeared on the Phil Donahue show back in the day, all right? And Mrs. Nixon happened to be watching that show. And she said to her husband, Dick, I saw Donald Trump on with Phil Donahue. He is amazing. And I think if he ever had political ambitions, he could really go all the way. So President Nixon said, really? And he knew him a little bit from New York, right? So he sat down and he wrote Donald Trump in 1987 a letter that said, Mrs. Nixon saw you on the Donahue show. It's now a famous letter. And should you pursue political office, we have no doubt you will be incredibly successful.
Wow.
So Donald Trump proudly puts that up. So I think if Richard Nixon were alive to have seen all of this, he would have been 1,000% behind Donald Trump. He would have been supportive of him.
Yes.
He would have been advising him behind the scenes as well. Nixon advised all of his successors, by the way, except for Jimmy Carter. But all of the rest of them, Bush 1, all of them, Bill Clinton, he gave them tons of advice behind the scenes because he was asked. He would have done the same thing with Donald Trump. They would have gotten along famously.
Wow.
And he would have had all respect and admiration for Donald Trump.
Yeah, Richard Nixon is the greatest.